Welcome to Business Reporter's Future of Payments campaign. I'm Ashley Blake. Card costs, foreign exchange rates, KYC and AML processes, chargebacks, all these technical terms will be familiar to the CFO or head of payments in any business, but not necessarily for its customers. Whether they're shopping online, booking a holiday or paying a business supplier, people expect a smooth and rapid transaction. These are complex processes, but they seem so simple on the surface that consumers are used to taking them no more than a few seconds, and they wouldn't tolerate anything less. With open banking, even non-banks have the opportunity to act as a payment platform, bringing more competition to the market. With Brexit, the cross-border payments have increased their costs and complexity. Together, CFOs have a lot to think about. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities? This is what we're going to find out from Kieran O'Malley from Trustly. Kieran, welcome to Business Reporter. Let's get straight into it, shall we? What have been the most important recent changes in the payment world?
It's a really interesting question. There's been a huge amount of change in the last decade across payments. I think for me the most interesting changes have been the movement from a card-dominated world into what was called alternative, now really central payment methods. There's greater diversity. The second area that I think is really driving this and really important is the movement towards open banking. And then the last thing that I'd like to touch on is the move to more convenient security. Security used to be quite challenging and now it's a fingerprint or Face ID. What open banking is doing is it's allowing businesses such as Trustly to use the infrastructure that banks provide, the current accounts that you and I have, to build a better way of making payments, particularly in this debit space. And debit is so crucial. Debit is 70% of payments if you look in the UK, for example. So open banking, it's allowing businesses like Trustly to build a solution that has a great user experience. You and I fingerprint to pay. What we don't realise when we fingerprint is that we eliminate a lot of the cost for the merchant because we've proved that it's us. So chargebacks and likes of things, well, they disappear. And what we're able to build with open banking is a better set of rails for a new payments ecosystem that will satisfy the needs of merchants for the next 10, 20, potentially 50 years. So payments is really changing. And in many ways for a customer, it's a quiet revolution.
So you touched upon the players in this arena. Who are the main sort of stakeholders of transactions?
So you and I have a debit card. Now that debit card is issued by a bank where we have our current account. The bank is known as an issuing bank. If we go to make a payment, we're buying these lovely chairs or something like that. Those details are transferred by us typing them in or putting our card into a reader to what's called an acquirer, an acquiring bank. Now, that acquiring bank, they are plugged into this payment system, Visa or MasterCard, who in effect transmit the data back to your bank that you have your money with, and then those funds move back later on. Now, through that process, there's a lot of data changing hands between different parties. Clearly, there's a lot of liability in that, and there's different fees and different products being sold. So a payment isn't a very simple experience for a merchant. It might be simple for you and I, might be a tap or a click, but actually the payments ecosystem has a lot of different players handling data and cost.
I see. So me as the consumer or as the merchant, what are the consequences of so many players on the field?
Yeah, interesting question. I think from a merchant perspective, there's a lot of complexity and there's quite a lot of cost. From a customer perspective, it's not necessarily as obvious. We see a little logo on our bank card, we probably don't know what it means. I certainly didn't before I joined the industry. But it affects us in little ways. You know, that slow process is one of the reasons why if you want a refund, it can take 5 to 7 to 14 days. And that does affect people. We've done a lot of research at Trustly about how frustrated customers get by that. So yes, it's unseen, but those parties do impact both the merchant and the customer experience.
I see. Perhaps you could give us an example of transparency in the whole process.
Yeah, really interesting. So one of the biggest sort of challenges that I think merchants have faced around payments transparency has been Brexit. Clearly an uncertain time for everyone, a huge change in the economy, but it came out quite early that some of the fees that a merchant will pay would change. Now, those fees were going from around 0.2% to 1.15%.
That's a massive hike.
It's enormous, right? If you're in an e-commerce world where margins are razor thin, maybe 5% of your turnover is profit, losing an additional 1%, that's quite a tough thing to take. So why is this important for transparency? Well, a lot of merchants don't really know whether or not their payments were going to fall into that, it's called intra-regional setup. You know, were their payments being processed in the UK only, or were they being processed as part of a wider European net? And that's important because it depended on whether or not you got this fee change. So it's a simple example of where a bit of a change in how payments are processed and charged, plus a lack of transparency, causes a lot of frustration and potentially additional cost.
For the merchant as well as the consumer?
For the merchant, the consumer doesn't see it directly. But clearly, if your cost base goes up 1% and you're in a thin margin environment, it's got to filter through to the customer. I strongly believe open banking is one of the key solutions that is going to eliminate this complexity. What open banking allows is it allows us to make a payment from a customer's account to a merchant a much more simplistic process where there's far fewer data points that are being exposed potentially to cybercrime and the like. It allows us to ramp up security in a simple way through a Face ID or a fingerprint. So open banking really gives us an opportunity to redefine debit payments in the market. And as I mentioned before, they're such an important part of the overall payments ecosystem. What open banking will allow us to do is take that process where I mentioned a data flow. So you put your card details in and it goes through different processors back to your account. That all disappears and a payment is immediately pushed from your bank account through to a merchant. So you get that data and payment at the same time. And this really allows us to build simpler, more effective experiences that reduce the cost for merchants and still give customers a really great user experience.
But what about refunds and chargebacks? How do they work in this?
Yeah, they are actually, to be honest, one of the most impactful parts of Trustly's proposition. Chargebacks are a nightmare. You almost wouldn't believe as someone not in the industry just how much effort chargebacks are. Now, one of the reasons for chargebacks is because in a card world, I could steal your card details when you nip to the loo, I could go and pay with that card, and all of a sudden you say, well, hang on, I didn't want 5 flights to Ibiza this summer. Well, that is a real challenge and you need a process to charge that back. With a Trustly payment, as I was mentioning before, you go through and you Face ID, you fingerprint, you prove that it's you. I can't do that in your case. So Trustly really moves the game forward by eliminating chargebacks. They just don't exist in our ecosystem. So it's a huge back-end saving. Now, you mentioned refunds. Is this shift to sort of more and more online commerce from offline commerce? You know, the refund is essential. With Trustly, all that happens is the merchant pings us through our API and says, refund this customer, and it's processed instantly. And by instant, I really mean a couple of minutes and those funds are back in the customer's account. And we're so proud of this because we did some research back end of 2020, looking at how do customers feel about refunds? And my favourite stat is that within 6 days, if the money isn't back in the customer's bank account, 87% of customers surveyed, and we did 10,000 customers, they would phone and complain.
I'm not surprised. It's their money, isn't it?
It's their money,
and they're
exactly.
expecting it to be back in their bank account to be able to spend again.
Well, that's the key thing, right? Spend again. It's kind of a limiting factor. But if you take that 6 days, it sounds a lot to you and I as people spending. From an actual business perspective, I've got the day while the goods are in the post. Yeah. I've then got to get it into my warehouse and check the goods and go through that inventory process. I then go to process the refund and it may take 4 days. So I'm kind of up against it there. And every case, every time you and I pick up the phone, there's someone on the other end. And that someone costs money, of course they do, right? And maybe they could be doing something more interesting or something more business sort of on the front foot of business, revenue generating. So that 87% of customers are driving up cost through simply slow refunds. And that's why we're so excited about our instant refund offering, because we cut those 4 days into a couple of minutes and really solve that pain point. The kind of high level way of thinking about this is, I'm a merchant, why don't I just connect to these APIs? Well, first of all, if you're trying to deliver a pan-European solution, you've got about 3,000 to connect to, which is quite a serious amount of work. The second area is that just because the API works in a relatively simple way, it doesn't mean that the payments processing necessarily is that simple. So, yes, you could integrate an API, you could allow someone like you or I to click on their bank and make a payment, but what happens after that? Well, those funds, they need to end up in one of your accounts. How do you reconcile that to the size 10 trainers that Kieran bought? Okay, you need to have a process for that. How do I then process a refund? Well, I need to have some way of informing my bank that I want to process that refund. All of these steps, they just build cost, right? And this is, I think, the challenge that a lot of merchants are facing. They thought, okay, open banking, absolute no-brainer, we'll integrate, we'll do this. And then as they went through the steps of a payment cycle, they realized this is quite complicated. And that's where we step in. We allow a merchant to plug into the benefits of open banking across Europe. And by the way, we also have a US solution, which is delivering a similar benefit. We allow them to plug in through a single API, potentially even through the existing payments processor that they're using. Right? That's how simple this is. They get all of the benefits that we've spoken about, but they don't have any of the downside, because we do all of this. We have hundreds of engineers who know that, in this country, this payment works in this way, and you have to have this reference code and all of this sort of specialist knowledge that there is really no kind of handbook for. And so that's what we're delivering, and we're really hoping to kind of cut the Gordonian knot with this and make it very simple, right? Complex ecosystem, we extract the best from it, and we deliver it to you in a very simple way.
So how do you see the whole payments system and process, say, in 10, 15 years' time?
Within sort of physical goods, within the fashion, the furniture, the retail world, we've seen a build of an offline and online ecosystem. And sometimes they interact, but not necessarily that well. I think that will get broken down. You will have these multi-channel experiences where you're not even aware you're in different channels as such. Right? I go and look at furniture in one place, I happen to maybe make a payment through a payment link that's text to me. I don't realize that actually that whole setup is omnichannel. I just want the goods, and I've looked at them in person and now I buy them online. So in the next 10 years, I really see that experience will sort of become the norm, as opposed to something that only the leaders in the market are doing. Now in a payments world, that means you need to have a great experience no matter where the customer is. And you need to give merchants, these businesses, the information so they can understand where the customer's been. So I think in that example, payments need to bend or need to build solutions towards those changes. Another key area where debit payments, the space in which we're so sort of strong in, is important, is around wealth. And I think that we're seeing this shift from wealth being something that people who had a lot of money got access to in slightly walnut walled rooms, and it was a very kind of mysterious product, to something that actually is just financial health. And whether you have £5,000, whether you have £500,000, you use an open, transparent system that tells you this is your position, these are products that could be good for you, and you need payment systems that allow me to get my money into that environment in an easy way. And maybe it proves KYC, it proves who I am, it makes it easy for the provider of wealth services to fill all of their own needs, right? They have compliance requirements, etc. So going back to your question, where do I see the next 10 years in that space, that payments is so key? Well, I see it as being seamless payments, allowing customers to actually improve their financial health in lots of different places, whilst eliminating some of the complex regulatory challenges with just simple solutions. So, a long-winded answer to a simple question, but that's what's so interesting about payments. It's such a broad area.
And who'd have thought?
Who would have thought?
So interesting. Kieran, thanks very much for walking us through the payment solution process.
No,
Thanks
thank you
very much indeed.
Ashley.